Okay, now here we are in Wilcox Park, which is going to contain various spots on the historical game board, all of them relevant. Ironic in that Wilcox Park has the statue of Christopher Columbus, intrepid Italian explorer who linked the old world of our fathers to the new world of our sons. And that is a very interesting metaphor for what we were doing with the cult. We were linking the old world of the fathers, which is to say that the world of all the cosmic plots, Christian, satanic, pagan, Cthulhuian, everything from Lovecraft's elder gods and the vampires of ancient days to various Christian quasi-apocalyptic plots, although none of them had to do with the book of Revelation, which is very important, and that will be illuminated later. But the old world, or the old ways of doing things, the old style cult scenarios, were linked to a whole new dimension of viewing things via our endeavors in the old cosmic. And that new dimension is seen as the chart. Here's one good example of the chart in the Old Cosmic Testament. In other words, everything in the old world, no matter what it is, through our endeavors, was reduced to just a spot on the game board. Or you can look at this pavement here in another sense. Every one of these blocks representing one box or one old world plot. Christian, satanic, pagan in various forms, naturalist, spiritualist, all the different things coming together in the madness of Nuahj and the alchemical furnace that we created. Now over here, getting into specific events. Right here, during the height of Nuahj, Greg and I were playing chess in the park as a way of clearing our head and getting away from it all one day during some particularly intense events involving Ross and his vampire body, Kaimane's unfolding and continuing schemes against him, and machinations of other cosmic figures who were both for and against both Ross and Kaimane. Greg and I are playing, and suddenly a dashing young guy, early 20s, dark hair, walks up to us. Who is it? It's apparently, in terms of the physical body that was approaching us, Eric Warren Tavak, Ross's younger brother, Christina's older brother. He's the middle child. Eric at that time, however, was not Eric. He was possessed by Matthew. Matthew was Kaimane's #1 guy. His quasi-demonic stooge, discorporal, who claimed to be the Matthew of the New Testament, by the way, because Kaimane claimed to be the actual inspiration for not only the Old Testament, but also the New Testament Christ plots, etc., etc. It's all very controversial. I don't even want to talk about it too loud in this environment, because we're in a very Catholic town. But anyway, Matthew came up and approached us while we were playing chess that day in Eric's body, and that was a very strange event that, the game that we were playing, he and I, Matthew/Eric, started playing chess, but even though it was on the chessboard, it wasn't the game of chess that we were playing, it was the cosmic game. Now here, this area right here, this fountain, with this lovely Greco-Roman style goddess figure, a variety of different cosmic figures in the channeling sense first appeared on benches around this fountain, channeled by either myself, John, even Jeff DeReamer got into the act, although he was quite inept at it and never really was that good at it. So this is just an interesting place, because if you look at, metaphorically, the fountain as representing the fount of the unconscious, the cosmic fount, these spirits would be coming out of the water, let's say, and like lightning to a lightning rod, attaching themselves to whoever was channeling at the time. Now over to here, in this direction, we have the Willow of Time, okay? Time being an acronym, theologically introspective mental evolution, okay? It was a club that I created along with Greg and Jeff in high school, and we would meet under the willow. So let's actually walk under the willow here. We met under the willow. That which is said under the willow stays under the willow was one of our slogans. And it was a place where basically the friendships that would later surface in the Nuahj cult were formed. A lot of characters who were part of Time, the club, by default ended up being members of the cult a few years later. So this is a particular place of note. Although nothing Nuahj related happened here, everyone who was a member of Time ended up being a player in Nuahj in one form or another. Particularly myself, Jeff, John Patsfield, Scott Desmaris, Ryan Bridgham, Joe Birch, a whole bunch of other characters on the periphery, but that was the core. Moving on to history. One thing that has to be understood about the entire cult scenario and how it was playing out in this small town is that everything was fodder for the cosmic cannons, let's say. Any book that we might find, anything we might discover, all of it was instantly chewed up, processed into the cosmic engine, and turned into one form of revelation or another. Plot level strings flowing endlessly. And over this hill and across the street, you can't see it now, but we're not going to walk down there just because it's not necessary. There was a bookstore called the Chalice Well. The Chalice Well was the only New Age bookshop in town, and it was run by one of the matrons of who would become the witches. Serena, Wanda, etc. all had connections in the Chalice Well bookshop circles. And again, characters that we knew from that circle by default became involved in Nuahj. Particularly Serena, whose relationship with the demon Zarathos, who I'll get to in a minute, was one of the key relationships of Nuahj and of my entire life. Wanda and the other types of characters from the witches weren't as connected to Nuahj per se. Mainly, it was Serena and events surrounding her. What we're coming up to now in the park, and maybe get a panoramic shot of the park here. Coming up to now is the spot where Greg and I first had the major discussion about astral planes, the whole architecture of parallel universes, etc. At the time, there was a bench right here. I don't know why it's gone, but it is. And there was a little dirt area right where we're standing. And I drew for Greg the map, which is the cosmic tree with its order and chaos and the branches going off into different directions. I've covered the map elsewhere. But this hillside was really where my whole understanding of what would later be revealed to be hyperspace, other dimensional types of views came into place for the first time in these discussions with Greg. And again, we see how my relationship with Greg in the golden days of our conversation was, for me, primarily a way of working out and understanding all the information I'd have first learned from Ross and from Kymane and from Christina. And the thing with Ross is he's a do as I do and as I say while I'm running away and on to the next stage. He never stopped really and explained anything to me. I had to pick it all up by default. So he wasn't much of a teacher as much as he was a force that blew through my life and manipulated me, and as a result of trying to understand that manipulation, I got the cosmic knowledge. He never really sat down and taught me in the way that I was teaching Greg the cosmic knowledge during these events, such as here on the hillside. Now, Down here, you see this gazebo, okay? And this was a major focal point for a lot of our channeling scenarios, because sometimes, like in Nuahj, events were going on, people were there, and you know, you couldn't really be around some characters, let's say, you know, hangers-on that were staying at the house who may or may not have been on the cosmic payroll of Anton LaVey and or the vampires and or Matthew and or whoever. So the park was often used as a third stage getaway place for certain things to occur, such as first channelings. Many first-time channelings of beings took place in the park, simply for the reason also that a lot of them allegedly were spirits of elder god or alien types who preferred nature to inside a house. They wanted to see trees, they wanted to see the stars. So we needed a conveniently located outside stage to do a lot of these channelings on. And this gazebo was one of them. And I'll just show you the picture in here, the legendary picture of Zarathos, as soon as I can find it. He, the demon Zarathos, was, and remains to this day actually, a key figure in my life, just for the sake of he saved my ass cosmically many times. He's a powerful, undeniable cosmic force. There he is. That's a drawing done by Zarathos while being channeled that he did of himself. Okay? And again, this is a humanoid mask that Zarathos would adopt on the astral plane. By nature, he was other dimensional energy, essentially a fire demon. But he would adopt a quasi Ghost Rider facade just because that's what we wanted to interact with. Down this way now. But anyway, Zarathos' first appearance was down there in that gazebo, as were many others. Okay? And we got to remember too, with the Wilcox Park here, you know, so many events that even I, with my incredible memory, have let slip through the halls of history. I could literally spend the entire day going from spot to spot here. This is where this happened, this is where that happened, this is where this being came in, this is where that. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to give you a general summary. Now, the staircase. This staircase we see here. At one point, Kaimain had already revealed to us, allegedly, that he is, or was, Anubis of ancient Egyptian lore. And we had been using the cartouche, which is essentially an ancient Egyptian style tarot that Ross had given me as a method of calling in a lot of these spirits. So, by default, the spirits and beings, see again here now, we have to make a distinction. When I say the word spirit, that means a discorporate being. It may or may not be the soul of a dead human impersonating someone alleging to be a god of ancient times. It's just a general categorization. It doesn't necessarily mean spirit in the sense of spiritualism, or spirit in the sense of ancient gods, or whatever. It's a very... terminology in these things is very key, because there were so many different types of beings, all of whom were spirits or impersonating themselves and alleging to be spirits when they may or may not have been something else. You see, this is a level of detail that's not usually even considered when people talk about a New Age cult scenario, because they are just concerned about the plot, and they're just buying arbitrarily whatever is being sold to them by the cosmic figures in question. You know, we never were that stupid. Although we bought at face value what we were being sold for the purposes of running the game board, we never quite believed it. Some of us did, but Greg and I always had a retreat of skepticism behind which to pull back and look at things objectively. And from that position, the chart would be born, ultimately. Back to the staircase. We had the cartouche in hand. It was Greg, John, Allison, and I on a particular day when we were trying to figure out, okay, the main cast of characters is alleging this Egyptian connection. So we better look into actual Egyptian mythology and try to figure out what the relationships might be. So Allison was standing right here with a book, Murray Hope's Book to the Cartouche, which tells about the mythological relationships. Greg and I were down there. John was wandering around up and down. And she was reading off the official, quote-unquote, version of a lot of these mythological characters. And Greg and I were making correlations to the cosmic figures. And it's a golden moment. There can be no more significant moment in the entire cult scenario, because that's when the architecture of all the relationships was first defined by us. And since we were the ones spinning the plot, there's no one to say that that's not an act of creation as well as an act of discovery. Because even if these spirits are genuinely other dimensional beings, again, they can be lying about their identity. They can be real and lying and still yet have valuable data to give us. Again, you have to get beyond any duality at all. True, false, real, imaginary. You have to forget those categories if you want to have any relevance or meaning when dealing with this type of stuff. Otherwise, you have to subscribe to a plot level and end up being somebody's bitch, or you walk away from it and denounce it as all insanity. Either way, you don't get the gold. The gold is found from the above plot level, beyond duality view, which would later be defined by Ross as the Abraxas principle. And we can't even get into all that, but we have to look at everything from the Abraxas all-seeing eye viewpoint. And this staircase is where we first, in the act of creation and discovery, laid it all out and really understood it, or tried to understand it. Okay, now, this pond right here, we summoned from the other dimensional depths of this pond elder god type characters who, using the interdimensional interface that water provides, were able to move from their dimension into ours and possess convenient stooges we had on hand, myself, John, or whoever was stupid enough to be the target at that point. And again, a lot of events happened involving this area. And again, the reason why a lot of these cosmic figures wanted an outside nature setting is because they were using the elements of nature cosmically in their whole game, their whole performance. So we could use that to our advantage. For example, we could purposely channel somebody inside a completely artificial atmosphere like the Crystal Mall, something that we use to get them off balance. In other words, let's say an elder god character. Levi is a perfect example. Levi, the incarnation of evil from the elder gods, essentially a hermit bastard, never wanted to interact with us to begin with. However, we needed to use his expertise at certain times. So we channeled him, brought him out in the Crystal Mall and an IHOP, two completely artificial environments, specifically because it would piss him off and keep him off guard and not allow him to be up on his game 100%. Whereas if you conjure him from the pond in a natural setting, he's got all kinds of natural elements that he can use at his disposal. So you see, knowledge of how the rules work is important. Again, most cultists will just do what the figure tells them. Go to the pond and draw me out. And they'll do it, and they're at the disadvantage. But again, because we were more on an equal footing with these characters, we made them play by our rules as much as we played by theirs. Moving on. Okay. Over there. I'm not going to make you walk across the whole length of the park to get to that point. But over there, you see the green statue, if you can zoom in on it.
Okay, yes.
You see it? Zoom in on that statue. The bench to the left of that at one time was directly in front of it. Okay? And that bench is where, now you can zoom back to me if you want.
Yeah.
That bench is where Greg was doing his own attempt at a quickening scenario with one of our peripheral cult members, a guy named Sean Smith. And it's a comical side note to the whole affair because Greg couldn't do it very well. he couldn't be the teacher to Sean as I was the teacher to him, as Ross had been the non-teacher by example to me. And so I had to kind of come in after the fact and repair a lot of the damage Greg's inept attempt at quickening this kid Sean had done. And it took place on that bench. And it's a key point to me because it really, we should have paid more attention to what that was telling us at the time. What it was telling us at the time was there was an essential flaw in Greg's character, and his agenda was never going to be anything but his personal quest for power in the cosmic. The reason that Greg couldn't do the quickening for Sean as I had done it for Greg is because Greg didn't want to give anybody else an advantage over him. He didn't want to pass over the knowledge. He didn't want to pass it on. And so his attempt to quicken Sean was in effect just a sad ego exercise, and it failed because Greg had no heart in it. He didn't have a genuine motivation. And if we had paid more attention to that at the time, things would have proceeded much differently, and Greg might not have been on an evil path for the last 11 years. But I'm not taking responsibility for that. I'm just pointing out that instance and that example was where the flare should have gone up, and we should have known what was happening. But of course, it was happening in the midst of 10 other things that we can't even explain, right? So there's no way we could have known. And hindsight's always 20/20, etc. Okay, keeping the camera facing this way as we walk in this direction. Okay?
How?
Just like that. Just get this shoreline, film the ducks, whatever. Another key player in the cosmic, I'll walk down here this way. Another key player was a guy named Steve Queen. Okay? Member of Time, good friend of Dave Lynch and I. Again, he was a guy who had a big natural cosmic ability. Steve Queen was hooked into the Babylonian gods. Marduk was his cosmic mentor. Okay? And so Steve Queen by default ended up being part of the Nuahj scene. And the one time when his cosmic figures were used in the plot to help us out in a particular scenario, it occurred on this hill right up here. So stop right here. That's fine. This hill, you're filming of that. Marduk came to the rescue on one particular day, thanks to Steve Queen channeling him and bringing him up to counter the devious plots of Matthew. Again, Matthew, who had possessed Ross's younger brother, as I had noted at our entrance to the park. Matthew was Kaimane's #1 hitman, wet work assassin, essentially. And the problem was, Steve Queen never knew this, and this is one thing I actually feel very bad about. When Queen came onto the scene, he was benevolently channeling his Babylonian gods and having a wonderful, happy time doing it. Steve Obreys, the other Steve, there were 3 Steves, me, Steve Queen, Steve Obreys. Steve Obreys had denounced Steve Queen and his Babylonian channelings as, dangerous business. You're meddling with demonic powers that should be left alone. There's a reason that the Babylonian gods haven't been worshipped for 3,000 years, etc. Obreys was a mundane guy who viewed the cosmic strictly in Jungian, Joseph Campbell type terms. It's all mythology, it's all interactions of consciousness, different states of consciousness, and anything further from that, any plot level activity, Obreys denounced. And Steve Queen was drawn to me because Obreys cast him out when Queen wouldn't stop channeling his Babylonian gods. And so his channeling of the Babylonian gods, anyway, played into, by default, the events of Nuahj. Again, on that hill over my shoulder, on one particular day, Marduk came to the rescue against Matthew. However, by Queen whipping out Marduk to help us against Matthew in that one instance, what happened was Marduk, although he appeared to win the battle against Matthew, he actually was destroyed by Matthew, and Matthew took over Steve Queen's unconscious mind, impersonating Marduk. Okay? So what had been a good Legion of Light type figure, Marduk, the Defender of Order, was destroyed and essentially sacrificed to save our asses. And Queen didn't know it at the time, but his own guardian angel became a demonic parasite that would later drive him insane. And to this day, Steve Queen's a broken man who went mad and doesn't know why. And I can never tell him because the guilt for me is very personal, because he was a nice kid, a lot of talent, and it was our own desperation that drew him into that scenario. And this is an example of something called the Cosmic Casualty Syndrome. And the Cosmic Casualty Syndrome means that the plot level is like a stampede of elephants, and it'll run you over in its progress towards the inevitable goal of whatever the plot level is. And a lot of people get trampled in the process. Steve Queen was one of them, and to this day, I do feel bad about it. Happened to many other characters in our cult, of course. Happened to the cult itself. So, you know, I'm not trying to pass around the crying towel, but I am taking responsibility for at least that one instance. All right, now we're going to wrap it up here in the park with the bench. Okay? This bench. Although it wasn't this bench, and it was actually located here. But this bench is where it all started. Everything started on this bench. I was 13 years old, riding my bicycle around the park, just on any other day, June 6th, 1984. And Ross was sitting right here. Sitting here, luxuriating, and he was looking up at the sky and just staring at the sky. I sat down next to him because I was exhausted. I had no clue what he was doing. And eventually I started looking up at the sky as well. And he turned to me and he said, "Thank you for proving my theory that if I stared at nothing, someone would join me." And here it is. This piece of paper in the Old Cosmic Testament. There's Ross luxuriating on the bench. There's the baffled 13-year-old Steve with his sunglasses and his bicycle shoes. "Thank you for proving my theory that if I sat here and stared at nothing, someone would join me." And that entire symbol sums up exactly how the cosmic proceeded. Ross was looking in a specific direction. Because of the magnetism of his personality, because of the dynamic, mysterious character that he was, the rest of us couldn't help but follow his gaze. And it led us to the cult, it led us to the various permutations that would eventually create the chart and everything else, and give us our cosmic perspective. But it all begins with him staring at nothing. And it's not nothing, when I say nothing, that's not what he's staring at, meaning nothing as an emptiness. It's the Gnostic nothing, what's called the pleroma, which is the infinite fullness. Goes back to a quote that was often spoken in Nuahj: "A point in every direction is the same as no point at all." With all the intersecting plots of our cult, we had a point in every direction. You name any cosmic scenario, it was unfolding at Nuahj. But it was unfolding alongside every other scenario. And that's what gave us the above plot level big picture chart perspective, and that's what Ross was trying to see as he was looking at nothing. But in order to look at the nothing and see it, he had to see everything. He had to see all the points at once. And so by puppeteering us, he produced all those points. And from his above plot level view, he thought he was going to be getting the ultimate power of the pleroma. Abraxas is the spirit of the pleroma. If the pleroma had a name, Jung said, it would be Abraxas. But what Ross forgot is that that sentence contains the word if. If it had a name. And the if is determined and dependent on your ability, your purity of heart. And Ross never had purity of heart. He only had purity of ambition. And that ultimately was why, even though he achieved his Abraxas metamorphosis, Jung and the revered dead caught him in their karmic net and bitch slapped him back into a place of servitude to the greater collective, the collective that Ross himself had contemptuously rejected, the collective that Greg to this day has rejected in imitation of Ross, and which has led him to be in a world of evil for 11 years. And it's my embrace of the collective and my desire to give back through the book, through the chart, through the goddess service. That's what has allowed me to prosper and to achieve the things that was our goal all along. And here's the kicker, and I'll end it here. You can only achieve the cosmic power and the cosmic knowledge when you've given up the desire to have it. You can only have it if you don't want it. As long as you want it, you'll die trying to have it. Zoom in on the double-headed bird, and that's it. All hail Abraxas.